So as you explain, as you write your essay, and then you are talking about luck. So make sure that you write that in a full sentence. For example, you could say, luck was one of the factors that led to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte I in France. That is a full sentence. Or you could say, one of the factors that led to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte I in France was luck. That is also correct. So make sure that what you are writing is in a full sentence and it makes historical sense. So as you identify your point, make sure it is a full sentence. Then you start by explaining. You start explaining your points. But how do you explain a point? You explain a point by answering the question, how? So if in your point identification, you stated that luck was responsible for the rise of Napoleon, correct? So now, as you explain, show us how. How did luck lead to the rise of Napoleon? So you're going to...
Teacher,
Yes?
is it a must that you should write your answer should cover like 10 lines?
I expected that question, and it's not a standard, it's not a very standard way of marking. I don't want to say that it should be 10 lines. It can be less than 10 lines when it has everything that we want in the point. And also, remember, the content that you write, that you present on the paper depends on very many things. It depends on your vocabulary. It also depends on how much content you know. It even depends on your handwriting. And therefore, that's why for us as teachers, we read through your work. We read through your work. But that is not to say that you should now write very brief things. Like I'm saying, your first 2 lines, you are going to identify the point. So if you have written a full sentence, I suspect it cannot go beyond 2 lines. It will be maximum 2 lines. Then the other lines that follow, you are now explaining what you have already identified. And in the end, it may not be 10 lines. Some points are lengthy than others. You're going to realize that as you write your essay, you're going to find sometimes you write some points you are able to explain in more words. In some points, you're able to explain only in a few words. So it is difficult to tell exactly how many lines a standard paragraph should have, but a minimum of about 7 lines. Yes, around by the time you reach the 7th line, you should have explained your point clearly. Is there any other question you want to ask as we proceed? Any other question? Okay, so people will ask along the way. Then as you explain your points, remember within your essay, we have opinions, and then we have facts, and then we have arguments in your essay. So you're going to find that sometimes people fail to balance between the two, opinion, fact, and argument. So make sure that in your essay, you are writing, first of all, the facts. The facts is what makes the history. For example, if we all know that the French Revolution started in 1789 on 5th May, everybody knows that. And then for you, for some reason or by accident, you state that the French Revolution started in 1879 on 5th May. You see that error? You have erred by writing the wrong year. Now you have faulted on fact. And therefore that now makes us to start doubting your history, you get. So make sure that the facts are accurate. Opinions vary and change from place to place, from person to person, but those facts should be very, very clearly laid down. All right. Another thing that could be fact is the names of people. Do you know the names of people who were there during the revolution? Do you know the names of places that were affected by the revolution? If you're talking about the revolution anyway. So names of people, names of places, names of events, those are facts, and they should come out clearly in your essays. All right. And then your opinions, those are what you think. For example, you may say the French Revolution would not have broken out if the king had not made a mistake of marrying Marie Antoinette. That is your opinion, and it is acceptable. So if you are going to write your essay, such opinions are they make the essay more interesting to read. Okay. So make sure that as you present your arguments, you always bring in your opinions, you bring in the argument in a very simple way. And then another thing I want to guide you guys is write your essays. Please write your essay in the past tense. Write it in simple English without complicating your life, and then pass. Make sure you have written all the points you want to write, and make sure you have finished in time. And above all, read through your essay. Usually people, when they are writing text messages to their friends. These days, technology has made it easy. But if you are just typing, you are on your own and you're writing a message to your friend, there's always that time before you post the message. You read it through to make sure that it is error-free. So I'm asking people, how come when you are communicating to your friends, you don't make errors? And how come when you are writing an important exam, you are making errors? Simply because you have not read it through. See? So make sure that before you submit in your work, you have read through your own work. In fact, you can even tell how much marks you're going to get if you have read through the work. So it's always important to read through your work. And remember, all questions carry equal marks. So do the simplest questions for you. The ones that you see as simple are the ones that you start with. And then, of course, don't forget to plan. Planning is very important. Planning here means that the first few minutes you have read through the question paper, you have ticked off the questions you want, and you have written down the summary points. And the summary points must be written in the answer booklet or in the answer sheet. Don't write it on the question paper. Write it on the answer sheet, the first page. That's where you do your planning. And when you have finished writing the essay, you can decide to either cross the plan or you leave it. But I encourage that people should not cross their plan. Just leave it there. It is not a crime. If the teacher finds it there, it is okay. Yes. So you proceed like that. Then we have also questions like how far, to what extent, how did, assess, evaluate, analyze, examine. Now, those are examination terminologies that examiners use sometimes to confuse students. Like how far, of course, you know that is two-sided. It means that they expect you to deal with this other side and the other side. To what extent also the same. Then assess also is in the same category. Assess here, usually they expect you to bring out the good side and the bad side, or the positive side and the other side that is not positive. So those are questions that students need, or question techniques that students need to know before even before they sit for an exam. Now, students should also know that as you're writing these questions here that have how far, to what extent, assess, there is a point where you reach and then you say, however, you have dealt with one side of the argument and now you're shifting to the other side of the argument. So it is called the however. You students like calling it the however side. But what is that word, however? However is a transition statement. So you say, however, the revolution also had negative effects. So you have now moved from one line of argument to the other line of argument. So that is also important for students to know. Then students need also to know the common mistakes made. As we write essays, people, we all struggle with the spellings, we all struggle with the time, we all struggle with interpretation, we all struggle with explanations, and sometimes you run out of words to write. Some of us struggle with handwriting. Some of us are struggling with presenting of tidy work. By the time you finish writing your own essay, it is not, you have crossed the papers too much. And then we struggle a lot with the chronology of our points. But over time, all these difficulties can be polished and they can be overcome when we are focused and we are interested in improvement. So if things are disturbing you at the moment, don't despair, because that is where all of us passed. So everybody struggles at some point with their academics. Everybody reaches the point and you find things are not moving. But when things become tough, then you also become tough. Then students need to know that there are many types of questions. I think I talked about that in the beginning. So we now know the different type of questions. We know how to write an introduction. We know how to explain. Maybe what people may be asking is, so how do we conclude? As you write your conclusion, it's important to write in general terms, general language. For example, you've dealt with the causes and effects of the French Revolution. So you're going to write your conclusion. So you can say the French Revolution had many causes. Some of the causes were long-term. Others were, of course, immediate or short-term. And then it had also very many effects. Some of the effects were long-lived, others did not live for long. Or you can say some of the effects were political, others were social, others were economic. Or you could say some of the effects were positive and others were, of course, negative. And then you, with the last remark, as explained above. You see? You see? So you can see that when you are concluding, you write in simple language. Then I want us now to deal with these two questions, these two first questions here. Account for the European hostility against France in the period, in the period 1790, I think that is 1792 up to 1814. Why was Europe so much against France? You see? Why was France attacked by her neighbors? There. So what are the candidates expected to write? Account for European hostility in Europe against France in the period 1792 up to 1814. You see that? So the candidates are expected to write what? They are expected to identify and explain the causes of the hostility between France and her neighbors until 1814. So in other words, they want us to talk about the period of the revolution when France went to war with her neighbors, but also at the same time, they expect us to go beyond that and look at the period during Napoleon's time, when again France remained at war with her neighbors. And I hope we all recall that France remained at war with her neighbors through coalitions that were formed against France. And we can recall the coalitions. We had the first coalition that was 1793 to 1797. Then you had the second coalition that is up to around 1802. Then we had the next coalition, the third coalition that was formed against France by European powers from 1802 up to 1807. And then the last coalition that was formed against France that led to the downfall of Napoleon, that was from 1813 up to 1814. So those were the coalitions that were formed against France. That is how France went to war with her neighbors. In other words, that is how France actually fought these wars, or how these countries fought with France. So look at, for example, they are saying here in our first point that one of the causes of the war between France and her neighbors was ideological differences, where around France, or we say in Europe by that time, we had monarchies. But in France, it's important to remember that the revolution had changed the trend of things, and now we had a republic in France. So in other words, the conflict between the Republican ideologies in France and then the threat it caused to the neighboring countries that were still monarchies is what actually led to war between France and her neighbors. A case in point, in Britain, we had a monarchy. It was a constitutional monarchy. In Austria, we still had a monarchy. And even in Russia, there was still a monarchy. So these European countries formed a coalition against France because they feared that if the issues in France by accident perhaps reaches their territories, they would also be overthrown, the leaders. And therefore, that's why there was war between France and her neighbors between that time, 1792 up to 1814. Then look at that, the number two, the activities of the emigres. Who were the emigres? Someone who wants to explain to me that. Who were the emigres? Anybody who's ready? Who were the emigres? Kevin, are you there? Who were the emigres? Okay. So, yes? I had someone talking somewhere. Yes? Yes?
The image were the people who were.
The immigrants were the people who escaped from France and went to neighboring countries during the French Revolution. Now, it's important to remember that they were organizing a counter-revolution. In other words, they wanted to come back and overthrow the republic that was already established in France, and so they wanted to come and help the king during the revolution. Now, that is also partly why there was war between France and her neighbors, specifically between Austria and Prussia. There was a time when these two countries wanted to come and help the king. And that is partly why there was war between France and her neighbors also. Then you had the rise of war parties, i.e. all parties supported war for selfish reasons. There are many parties in France, and we had the Jacobins, we had the Girondins, and at some point they started fighting each other. And that caused a lot of violence during the revolution. Now, other European countries felt they should come and rescue the situation in France, and that's partly why they came and invaded France, or they were planning to invade France. And then we had sometimes there were economic conflicts between France and her competitors. For example, we had a competition between France and Britain because of economic benefits in Belgium. You see that France is a close neighbor to Belgium, and even the Belgians speak French, by the way. So France has been having a tight connection with Belgium for a long time. But also, Belgium has connections with Britain, and therefore competition for such economic benefits that will be derived from friendship with Belgium is partly why Britain was at war with France, and Britain was fighting as part of the coalition that was formed against France. So that also caused the war. Then the impact of the civil constitution of the clergy. We all know that the civil constitution of the clergy was a law that was introduced during the revolution, and it changed the status of the clergy. In other words, the clergy that had so many privileges before the revolution was now stripped of all its privileges. They lost their control over education, they lost all their privileges, they lost the land, and they even became civil servants. So Catholic countries and Catholic leaders in Europe attacked France basing on their religious beliefs. So that is also yet another reason why France was at war with her neighbors. Then let's see here another cause of war, the influence of the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror, we all know it was a period of chaos, bloodshed, and confusion in France. But many people were killed during the Reign of Terror, and some of them were very prominent people. Case in point was the king himself, who was guillotined by the revolutionaries in 1793, January. And then we had, of course, the queen, who was also guillotined a year after that. Now, the impact of the Reign of Terror now caused a lot of panic in the neighboring countries, and therefore they decided, in a way also, to come and rescue the people of France, to come and rescue the leader in France, but also to come and find a way of stopping the wave that had started in France and was soon threatening to move to their territories. So that's partly also why that is also partly why there was war between France and her neighbors. Then you had the death of Mirabeau. Anybody who wants to tell me something about Mirabeau? Who was Mirabeau? Yes? Who was Mirabeau? Yes?
Was a mediator between the revolutionary government and the Bourbon monarch.
Very good. He was like the mediator. Now, it's true that Mirabeau died during the revolution, unfortunately. And after his death, the king made very many errors. But these errors placed the king in a very desperate position, in a very delicate position that actually placed also France in a position of war with her neighbors. For example, after the death of Mirabeau, the king tried to run away to Austria, and unfortunately he was intercepted shortly before he could cross the border. When he reached Venice. Anyway, so it was because the kings made so many errors, and France now became the target for all these other European countries. So if Mirabeau was there, perhaps the king would have taken his advice, and perhaps war would not have broken out between France and her neighbors. Then we had threats from neighboring countries. Neighboring countries like Austria, like Prussia, they were threatening that they would declare war on France. And that angered the revolutionaries very much. It made them to plan for war immediately with France. I mean, it made the revolutionaries to plan for war with their neighbors. And indeed, they did not only threaten, they actually went to war, as you can see. So it is true that the French Revolution was now threatening the other monarchies in Europe. Then we had the execution of the royal family, starting with the king. It is true that the king was found guilty of, the king was found to be guilty of treason, and then he was sentenced to death. And after his execution in January 1793, the queen was left under the protection of Marcus Lafayette. And Marcus Lafayette, unfortunately, was the queen's most dangerous person. In other words, the queen did not like Lafayette at all. Lafayette was the queen's enemy. But anyway, still Lafayette took charge of her security. So one day, the queen got tired of being protected by her own word, by her own enemy. And therefore, the queen requested to die. The queen wrote a letter to her children, telling them that she's going to be very strong throughout her execution. And the queen was first of all paraded for the people to see. And they started moving with the queen to the execution point. And it's on record that before the queen could reach the execution point, the queen herself collapsed, and then she died. But anyway, still the death of the queen, who was from Austria, now caused a lot of chaos between France and Austria. So we can say for the case of Austria, the death of the queen meant a lot because she was from Austria. She was an Austrian. Then we had the Napoleon's continental system. Let's first see this one. The rise of Napoleon. Napoleon rose to power, and Napoleon went to war with very many European countries. We all know that. Can we name some of the wars that Napoleon fought with other European countries? Who knows some of them? Some of the battles Napoleon fought. Anybody who can list them for us?
We have the Trafalgar War, the
1805.
Yeah, the
Which one is that?
Campaign,
Moscow campaign, which year?
17 something, I don't recall.
1812. Which other year?
Have even the Italian campaign.
Yeah, Italian campaign, 1796.
Yeah, okay.
Then we also have the Egyptian campaign,
Okay.
1798. And then we had the battle of, there's this other battle here that he fought. What is the name? the Peninsular War. The Peninsular War, 1808 up to around 1811. So we can conclude that the rise of Napoleon indeed was responsible for war between France and her neighbors, basing on those examples. Then we have
Who is the teacher? chat data is going on.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes. My phone had got a problem, so I had to go off. So I've just done everything now. Everything is fine.